Bleep bloop. All right, welcome to Conjure Wife, everybody. This was written by Fritz Leiber published in 1943. Went into public domain last year and is available on Project Gutenberg over here. This is a horror story, so if horror stories make you a little squeamish, please take care. This story does deal with some supernatural and psychological horror, I think is probably the best way I can put it. And also it uses language that I wouldn't necessarily use in my day-to-day life, but since that's the way it's been written, that's the way I'm going to read it. So, without further ado, here's chapter 12. The rhythmic rattle and surge of the train had a soothing monotony. You could hear the engine puffing lustily. The wide, heat-baked green fields swinging past the window of the compartment drowsed in the northern noonday sun. The farms and cattle and horses dotting them here and there looked equally somnolent. He would have liked to sleep, but he knew he would not be able to, and as for she apparently never slept. "I want to run over some things," he said. "Interrupt me if you hear anything that sounds wrong or you don't understand." From the corner of his eye, he noted the figure sitting between him and the window nod once. It occurred to him that there was something terrible about an adaptability that could familiarize him even to her, so that now, after only a day and a half, he was using her as a kind of thinking machine, asking for her memories and reactions in the same way that a man might direct a servant to put a certain record on the phonograph. At the same time, he knew that he was able to make this close contact endurable only by carefully directing his thoughts and actions, like the trick he had acquired of never quite looking at her directly. And he kept himself nerved up with the thought of what lay ahead, and his determination to regain what had been lost in his hate. The present condition was only temporary, but if he once let himself start to think what it would mean to live a lifetime, to share bed and board with that blackness, coldness, vacancy. Other people noticed the difference all right. Like those crowds they'd had to push through in New York yesterday. Somehow people always edged away so they wouldn't have to touch her. And he had caught more than one following glance, poised between curiosity and fear. And when that other woman started to scream, lucky they had been able to lose themselves in the crowd. The brief stopover at New York had provided him with some vitally necessary materials, though he still felt hampered by the lack of his library and notes. But he had been glad last night when it was over. The compartment seemed a haven of privacy. What was it those other people noticed? True, if you looked closely, the heavy cosmetics only provided a grotesque and garish contrast to the underlying pallor, and powder did not wholly conceal the ugly dark bruise around the mouth. But the veil helped, and you had to look very closely. The cosmetics were practically a theatrical makeup. Was it her walk that they noticed? Or the way her clothes hung? Her clothes always looked a little like a scarecrow's now, though you could not put your finger on the reason. Or was it? But that was what he must not think about. Magic is a practical science, he talked to the wall as if dictating. There is all the difference in the world between a formula in physics and a formula in magic, although they have the same name. The former describes in terse mathematical symbols some cause-effect relationship of wide generality, but a formula in magic is a way of getting or accomplishing something. It always takes into account the motivation or desire of the person performing the magic, be it greed, love, revenge, or whatnot. Whereas the experiment in physics is essentially independent of the experimenter. In short, there has been little or no pure, non-practical magic compared to pure science. This distinction between physics and magic is just an accident of history. Physics is ultimately as practical as magic, but it possesses a superstructure of theory that magic lacks. Magic could be given such a superstructure by research in pure magic and by the investigation and correlation of the magic formulas of different people and times, with a view to deriving basic formulas which could be expressed in mathematical symbols, and which would have a wide application. Most persons practicing magic have been too interested in immediate results to bother about theory. But just as research in pure science has ultimately led, seemingly by accident, to results of vast practical importance, so research in pure magic might be expected to yield similar results. He waited a moment for comment, then went on. The subject matter of magic is akin to that of physics, in that it deals with certain forces and materials, though these, I believe it is more akin to psychology, the voice interrupted. How so? He still looked at the wall. Because it concerns the control of other beings, the summoning of them, and the constraining of them to perform certain actions. Good. That is very suggestive. Fortunately, formulas may still hold good so long as their reference is clear, though we are ignorant of the precise nature of the entities to which they refer. For example, a physicist need not be able to give a visual description of an atom, even if the term visual appearance has any meaning when applied to an atom, which is doubtful. Similarly, a sorcerer need not be able to describe the appearance and nature of the entity he summons, but the point is well taken. Many seemingly impersonal forces, when broken down sufficiently, become something very much like personality. It's not too far-fetched to say that it would take a science resembling psychology to describe the behavior of a single electron, with all its whims and impulses, though electrons are in the aggregate obey relatively simple laws, just as human beings do when considered as crowds. The same holds true of the basic entities of magic, and to a much greater degree. It is partly for this reason that magical processes are so tricky and dangerous, and why their working can be so readily impeded if the intended victim is on guard against them, as your formulas have to our knowledge been nullified since Mrs. Gunnison stole your book. That one formula I used on Sunday night worked only because it was not anticipated that I would be the operator. And even at that, its working was greatly hindered. His words possessed for him an incredibly strange overtone, but it was only by maintaining a dry, scholarly manner that he could keep going. He knew that at the first touch of casualness or informality, the latent morbidity of the situation would engulf him. There remains one all-important consideration, he went on swiftly. Magic appears to be a science which markedly depends on its environment, that is, the situation of the world and the general conditions of the cosmos at any particular time. For example, Euclidean geometry is useful on Earth, but there are regions, and it would be easy to imagine more, in which a non-Euclidean geometry is more practical. The same is true of magic, but to a more striking degree. The basic unstated formulas of magic appear to change with the passage of time, requiring frequent restatement, though it might conceivably be possible to discover master formulas governing that change. It has been speculated that the laws of physics show a similar evolutionary tendency, though if they do evolve, it is at a much less rapid rate than those of magic. It is natural that the laws of magic should evolve or change more swiftly, since magic depends on a contact between the material world and another level of being, and that contact is complex and may be shifting rapidly. Take astrology, for example. In the course of several thousand years, the precision of the equinoxes has put the sun into entirely different celestial houses, signs of the zodiac, at the same times of year. A person born, say, on March 22nd is still said to be born in Aries, though he is actually born when the sun is in the constellation Pisces. A failure to take into consideration this evolutionary change since the formulas of astrology were first discovered has rendered the formulas obsolete and invalidated them for... It is my belief, the voice broke in, like a phonograph suddenly starting, that astrology has always been largely invalid. That is the one of the many pretended sciences which have been confused with true magic and used as a kind of window dressing. Such is my belief. I presume that may be the case. It would help to explain why magic itself has been outwardly discredited as a science, which is the point I'm getting at. Suppose the basic formulas of physics, such as Newton's 3 laws of motion, had changed several times in the last few thousand years. The discovery of any physical laws at any time would have been vastly more difficult. The same experiments would give different results in different ages, but that is the case with magic, and explains why magic has been periodically discredited and has become repugnant to the rational mind. It's like what old Carr was saying about the run of the cards at bridge. After a few shuffles of a multitude of cosmic factors, the laws of magic change. A sharp eye can spot the changes, but the continual experimentation of the trial and error sort is necessary to keep the crude, practical formulas of magic in anything like working order, especially since the basic formulas and the master formulas have never been discovered. Take a concrete example. The formula I used Sunday night. It shows signs of recent revision. For instance, what did the original unrevised formula have in place of the phonograph needle? A willow whistle of a certain shape which had been blown only once, the voice told him. And the platinum or iridium? The original formula mentioned silver, but a heavier metal serves better. Lead, however, proved altogether ineffective. I tried it once. It was apparently too unlike silver in other respects. Precisely. Trial and error experimentation. I have a modern substitute for the flannel wrapping which may prove more effective. Moreover, in the absence of thorough investigation, we cannot be sure that all the ingredients of a magic formula are essential in making it work. A comparison of the magic formulas in different countries and peoples would be helpful in this respect. It would show which ingredients are common to all formulas and therefore presumably essential, and which are not essential. I have in mind a method for making such a comparison. There was a discreet knock at the door. Norman spoke a few words and the figure drew down its veil and turned toward the window, as if staring stolidly at the passing fields. Then he opened the door. It was lunch, as long in coming as breakfast had been, and there was a new face, coffee-colored instead of ebony. Evidently the first waiter, who had shown growing nervousness in his previous trips to the compartment, had decided to sacrifice the tip and send someone else. With a mixture of curiosity and impatience, Norman waited for the reactions of the newcomer. He almost felt able to predict them. First, a very quick, inquisitive glance past him at the seated figure. Norman guessed they had become the major mystery of the train. Then a longer, sideways glance while setting up the folding table, ending with the eyes getting very wide. He could almost feel the coffee-colored flesh crawl. Only hurried, almost unwilling glances after that, with a growing uneasiness manifested in clumsy handling of the dishes and glassware. Then a too pleasant smile and a hasty departure. Only once Norman interfered to place the knives and forks so that they lay at right angles to their usual position. The meal was a simple one, almost ascetic. He did not look across the table as he ate. There was something worse than animal greediness about that methodical feeding. After the meal, he put the leftovers into a small cardboard box, covered them with a napkin he had used to wipe all the dishes clean, and placed the box in his suitcase beside an envelope containing clippings from his own fingernails. The sight of the clean breakfast dishes had been one of the things which had helped to disturb the first waiter, but Norman had determined to adhere strictly to a complete set of taboos. They were an odd assortment, gleaned from his memories of Negro, Polynesian, and Indian practices. Of course, there might be no protection gained by observing taboos, but then again, there might be. So he collected food fragments, saw to it that no knives or other sharp instruments pointed toward them, had them sleep with their heads nearest the engine and their destination, and enforced a number of other minor regulations. Eating in private satisfied still another taboo, but there was more than one reason for that. He glanced at his watch. Only half an hour until Hempnell. He had not realized they were quite so close. There was the faint sense of an almost physical resistance from that region, as if the air were thickening, and his mind was tossing with a multitude of problems yet to be considered. Deliberately turning his back, he said, "According to the myths, souls may be imprisoned in all sorts of ways, in boxes, in knots, in animals, in stones. Have you any ideas on this subject?" As he feared, this particular question brought the usual irrelevant response. The answering words had the same dull persistence. "I want my soul." His hands, clasped behind his back, tightened. This was why he had avoided the question until now. Yet he had to know more, if that were possible. But where exactly should we look for it? I want my soul. Yes. It was hard for him to control his voice. But how precisely might it be hidden? It will help if I know. There was a rather long pause. Then, the environment of the soul is the human brain. If it is free, it immediately seeks such an environment. It may be said that soul and body are two separate creatures, living together in a symbiotic relationship so intimate and tight that they normally seem to be only one creature. The closeness of this contact appears to have increased with the centuries. Indeed, when the body it occupies dies, the soul is usually unable to escape and appears to die too, or to migrate to another level of being. I have no clear knowledge of that matter. But by supernatural means, the soul may sometimes be divorced from the body it is occupying. Then, if it is prevented from re-entering its own body, it is irresistibly drawn to another, whether or not that other body possesses a soul. And so the captive soul is usually imprisoned in the brain of its captor, unable either to escape from or to control that brain. In immediate contact with the soul of the captor, and forced to view and feel, in complete intimacy, the workings of that soul. Therein lies perhaps its chief torment. Beads of sweat prickled his scalp and forehead. His voice did not shake, but it was unnaturally heavy and sibilant as he asked, "What is Evelyn Sawtelle like?" The answer sounded as if it were being read verbatim from the summary of a political dossier. "She is dominated by a desire for social prestige. She spends most of her time in unsuccessfully attempting to be snobbish. She has romantic ideas about herself, but since they are too high flown to find satisfaction, she is prim and moralistic, with rigid standards of conduct. She believes she was cheated in her husband, and is always apprehensive that he will lose what ground she has gained for him. Being unsure of herself, she is given to acts of maliciousness and sudden cruelty. At present she is very frightened and constantly on guard. That is why she had her magic all ready when she received the phone call." "I can't wait until tomorrow," he told himself. "I must begin with her this afternoon." Aloud he asked, "Mrs. Gunnison, what do you think of her?" "She is a woman of abundant vigor and appetites. She is a good housewife and hostess, but those activities hardly take the edge off her energies. She should have been mistress of a feudal domain. She is a born tyrant and grows fat on it. Her appetites, many of them incapable of open satisfaction in our present society, nevertheless find devious outlets. Servant girls of the Gunnisons have told stories, but not often, and then guardedly, for she is ruthless against those who oppose her or threaten her security." "And Mrs. Carr, that is, if she comes in this category?" "Little can be said of her. She is conventional, an indulgent ruler of her husband, and enjoys being thought sweet and saintly. But I am uncertain of her deeper motivations." "It may be, then, that she is not hostile?" He was remembering the telephone call from Mrs. Carr just before he left for the East, when she had seemed to be trying to check on the activities of Evelyn Sawtelle. "It may be, yet at times I have been aware of her looking at me long and strangely." There was a knock. It was the porter come for the bags. "Be in Hempnell in 5 minutes, sir. Shall I brush you in the corridor?" The Norman tipped him and declined the service. He also told him they would carry their own bags. The porter smiled jerkily and backed out. Norman crossed to the forward window. There was only the gravel wall of a gully, and above it dark trees flashing indistinctly past, but almost immediately the gravel wall gave way to a wide panorama as the track swung around and down the hillside. There was more woodland than field in the valley. The trees seemed to encroach on the town, dwarfing it. From this particular point it looked quite tiny, but the college building stood out with a cold distinctness. He fancied he could make out the window of his office. Those cold gray towers and darker roofs were like an intrusion from some other, older world, and his heart began to pound, as if he had suddenly sighted the fortress of the enemy.